no further ado, I present Clark Bastian.
All right. Thank you, Bunny. Appreciate that introduction. And, I've attended some really fantastic presentations in this room, and it's a little imposing for me to be up here at the podium today. I think I've counted 3 current or former curators in the audience. 2 of them are taking notes, so we'll see how I do. 2006, I'd have to tell you, Bunny, it really wasn't my idea.
Oh.
But I'm 65 years old. I have been working on this block, Main, English, Market, William. I've been working on that block for 42 years. And about 30 years ago, I oversaw the construction and design and construction of the Fidelity Bank headquarters building, which was finished in 1986. But fast forward to 2006, we were running out of space in our headquarters building, and I had started to look around for other space. What are we going to do? We looked out on K96, trying to find some space. And then something happened. These 2 guys. My brother Clay is on the left. On the right is Joe Johnson, noted architect, not our architect, by the way, with Schaefer Johnson, Cox and Fry. And the 2 of them were walking across Main Street, going to have lunch at something over at Century 2. And he asked my brother something about, well, how's Fidelity doing? And he said, oh, we're running out of space in our building. My brother's looking around trying to find space. And they got about halfway across Main Street, and Joe stopped in his tracks, turned around and said, you tell your brother to look in his own backyard. The Carnegie Library building's been dark since 2000, and the city doesn't know what to do with it. So we thought, wow. This is a view of the back side of the library from my former office in the headquarters building. And for 20 years, I'd walk into that office, take off my coat, hang it up, look out the window, beautiful day. Not once in all those years did I once think, gee, I wonder if the city would lease or sell us the old Carnegie Library building we could expand to. So anyway, fortunately, someone else had that vision. Today, I'm going to talk about building history, the restoration, a little bit about the art of the Carnegie, and celebrations. Well, first off, the building opened in May 15th, 1915, and was dedicated a few months after that. I might point out on the left side, you see what I believe is a fire tower where the city fire department would hang their hoses to dry. At least that's my theory. Maybe one of the curators can help me with that. But we feel this picture was taken about the time of its opening. Wichita had been incorporated for 45 years at that point, and there had been no library building. There was no museum. Why? Well, I'm not really sure, but I'd say Wichita was busy building itself. But I want to take you back another 5 years to April 1865. Anybody know what was going on with our country back then? That's right. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, and a few days after that, Lincoln was assassinated. Anybody know what was going on in Kansas in April 1865? Not so much. Not so much. But a few months later, in October, the Treaty of the Little Arkansas occurred. 3,000 Plains Indians sat down with 7 peace commissioners appointed by the federal government at a spot on the Arkansas River 6 miles north of us. And the tribes that were represented, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Plains Apache, all were there. It's kind of a sad point in our American history. But that occurred October 1865. A couple of years after that, Darius Munger arrives from Topeka and builds the first permanent structure in this little settlement of Wichita. Probably everybody in here knows that that house still exists. It's out on the grounds of Old Cowtown Museum. It was the first home in Wichita, also the first gathering place, the first post office, I think the first justice hall even, and the first hotel. And we're very fortunate that it still exists. This was what Wichita looked like in 1869, according to Coye von Seward, who painted this painting in 1920. And we know that he painted it from, there were surveyor notes that showed what structures were here then. And I think it's kind of interesting to look at the real property and what's been depicted in the painting. They're very, very similar. The house, the Munger House, was originally sited at 9th and Waco, a couple blocks from the river at that point. And amazingly, it was moved, expanded on, and actually encapsulated in a house, and that's why it still exists. It was, unbeknownst to anybody, was protected for a number of years until it was rediscovered. And then a couple years after that, there was an incident that represented Wichita's first economic development crisis when a competing prairie town decided they were going to boot Wichita off the Chisholm Trail. That's an important point in our history because if they hadn't made an effort to turn that around, there was a cattle drive, the first one of the spring in 1871. If they hadn't gone out and met the herd, convinced them to come to Wichita, you might all be living in the metro area of Park City, Kansas. And Wichita would not be a place. In 1872, next year, Louise Caldwell, age 14, and her family arrive in Wichita from Allegheny County, New York, and her father opens a china and pottery store. Louise enters the church choir and meets a fellow by the name of Roland Murdoch, and they fall in love and become married. Fast forwarding to 1912, Louise, now 54 and a widower, has become a successful interior designer and businesswoman. Does everybody in here know the name Louise Murdoch? Probably. No surprise. At the same time, in 1912, Andrew Carnegie, at age 76 and the world's richest man, offers a $75,000 grant to build a public library in Wichita. Okay, just how rich was Andrew Carnegie? I mean, it's the banker in me. Well, the answer is $480 million. And to me, when I read that, I thought, that doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, not for the world's richest man. So I ran across this chart. It's a few years old, but it converts the wealth of Andrew Carnegie into today's purchasing power And you can see the chart showing 309 billion with a B, followed by Bill Gates at 136 million. If you've been keeping up with him, he's been giving away a lot of his fortune, and perhaps it's closer to 90 billion now, but when the chart was made, 136. Sam Walton, 65 billion. Warren Buffett, 64 billion. And Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire, 62 billion. If you stack those all up, they just barely crest over the wealth of Andrew Carnegie. So he was a pretty rich fellow. But he also was the father of modern philanthropy. And when I grew up, I thought Andrew Carnegie, and I'm calling him Carnegie. I grew up calling him Carnegie, but I've since learned that in Pennsylvania they refer to him as Carnegie. I thought he was big steel king, union buster, kind of a robber baron. Well, he was an extremely generous man late in life. When he sold his fortune, almost all of it, and began funding free public libraries and academic libraries. In fact, over 2,500 in what then was called the English-speaking world. There were some in Canada, some in Ireland and Scotland, about 1,600 in the United States, at then a cost of $55 million. Carnegie gave Wichita its first public library building, but it wasn't his first gift to Wichita. Anybody know the answer? In 1905, Carnegie approved $40,000 to build this library at Wichita's Fairmount College. And it was a sad day in 1964 when it burned down. It had served as the art building at Wichita University for the 25 years preceding its burning down. But pretty amazing building. And it actually was sited where McKnight's, the current art building, is. In Kansas, Carnegie funded a total of 66 libraries, 59 public and 7 academic. 15 remain today. 29 are still functioning as libraries. And I don't mean this as a slight, but one of the reasons they're still functioning as libraries is the towns really didn't grow that much. They didn't grow out of the library that Carnegie funded. 9 are art centers, 50 are city-owned, miscellaneous use, and 8 privately owned. So what did Carnegie require to obtain his generous funding? Well, he very cleverly told municipalities that they needed to submit their own architectural plans for his review and approval. And this particular one is the front elevation of Wichita's Carnegie Library. We were so fortunate to find that there was a complete set of the plans, I think 9 sheets, which was a lot in those days, 9 sheets at Ablaw Library at Wichita State in their collection, and they allowed us to make copies. One of the benefits of having each city submit their own plans, it began that feeling of ownership that this is our library. There were some things that he wanted to see, such as steps leading up to the front doors, kind of like rising to knowledge. He also liked symmetry in the design. The wings are pretty symmetrical on the inside of most Carnegie libraries, and a central gathering place, a rotunda, which our library has all of those features. He also said that cities must agree to spend annually an amount equal to 10% of the gift. And that would mean that Wichita would need to spend $7,500 a year to keep the place clean, buy books, pay salaries, and the like. And At that time, we had a city commission of 5 commissioners. Would you believe 2 voted against accepting the $75,000 gift? Now, Wichita was a city of 50,000 people in those days, and these 2 gentlemen felt that the gift it would be just too ostentatious a building. And they worried about paying the annual requirement of $7,500. Well, fortunately, the majority won, and it was built next to Wichita City Hall, now the Wichita Sedgwick County Historical Museum. And this postcard is pretty close to the time of opening. I love that old car. It seems to be situated on the streetcar rails, perhaps. I'm not sure what those are. But very similar to what you see today. And here's a view inside. And we believe this was from the front doors when you would walk in. And you can see that, the circulation desk is prominently featured with the stacks behind it. The floor is, we believe, cork. That was on the plans. And when we were doing some work on the mosaic tile, we found a little piece of cork tucked under some of the tiles. Well, as I mentioned, Wichita was a city of 50,000 people, and in the fall of 1915, at the dedication, the Wichita Eagle reported that 600 attended the dedication. Well, I don't know where they would have put 600 people, but the article mentioned many people by name. It was kind of a status symbol to be there at the dedication. And a Presbyterian minister gave the keynote address, and that was a heading in the article about the dedication. And it proclaimed, "Wichita has finally passed the bread, butter, and boom stages, reaching the intellectual zone of civilization." Wichita. They were certainly proud of their Carnegie Library building. It was more than a place to house books. As I mentioned, there was no art museum or any museum of any kind. And a group soon after, 1920s, organized as the Wichita Art Association, and they began holding exhibitions and lectures in the library. And they were also organized with the idea that they would be promoting the idea of building an art museum. I'll tell you about that in just a little bit, but I found this museum news published by the Wichita Art Association in the Wichita Art Museum's library. They have a collection of, they've found some of them. But you can see 1924, the city library, a program is being arranged, and every member is urged to be present. The committee promises some surprises that are sure to be agreeably received by the members. And then here's a note about the usual first night for members only will be observed Thursday evening regarding a program. And this proved so popular that an outside stairway was added to the front of the library where people could go down the steps and into the basement to enter what was called Library Hall. I'd always wondered, why was the north wing of the library dug 2 feet deeper than the south side? Well, it was to give that feeling that you were not in a basement, but in a hall. Wanted to talk at the same time, along with the Wichita Art Association beginning. Wichita became known as a hotbed for art, especially printmaking. And C.A. Seward figured heavily in that. He was not only on the library board, he was also involved in the founding of the Wichita Art Association. And he was kind of an unpaid curator he arranged 14 American block print exhibitions that were held in the Carnegie from 1922 to 1946. His granddaughter, Barbara Thompson, published a catalog, maybe some of you have seen it. It lists all the block print exhibitions, and I counted them up. There were 268 artists in those 14 shows, 1,300 artworks from 34 states represented. And Kansas had a little bit under 10% of the artists, so these were works coming from all over the country. Once I had those catalogs, I went back through the Fidelity Bank library collection of art, and a couple Berger Sanzens, Norma Bassett Halls, and there's a Herschel Logan, I think Sod House in Winter, that we had purchased prints of those images, and they actually hung in the block print shows during that time period. So I was pretty excited to discover that. Some library facts. Remember those two guys that voted against building the library and getting Mr. Carnegie's money? Well, in 9 years of operations, membership cards are 7 times higher. The books in the library had grown to 41,000 volumes. The daily average of books lent, 1,250. And that budget they were worried about, it's 5 times bigger in 9 years. So Wichitans embraced the idea of a public library, and the local politicians got behind it. In fact, the head librarian, who was the first professional librarian, Julius Luch, said, "This is after 9 years, we need a bigger building." Well, they made do. And it served as Wichita's central library for 52 years. Until 1967. Does anybody, can you do the math in your head? How many years has the current library been in place? And it's about to move to the brand new library. Well, it's also 52 years to 2018. It's pretty remarkable. This picture in 1967 shows how the books were transferred from the Carnegie Library building into the new library. And they bussed in a bunch of high school kids. I've met some of them as adults when I've given tours. They've said, "I was one of those kids." But after the move occurred, the library became a municipal court operating from 1967 to 75, and I have firsthand knowledge of that. Someone else I was giving a tour to, he's a little older than me, and I mentioned that, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I had to see a judge about a speeding ticket when I was a teenager." Then it became a bicentennial project to repurpose the building from municipal courtrooms to the Wichita Omnisphere and Science Center, 47 seats, planetarium. And that brings me to 2006, the restoration. It seemed like a really good idea. 15,000 square feet, sound structure. It was made to hold books. No structural problems. There was no elevator, no heating and cooling. We had to remove that planetarium, and maybe we could connect it via a walkway. Well, we were all excited. There were some road bumps along the way to getting the city to vote to sell us the library building. We really didn't think they would sell it, so we proposed a 99-year lease, and that became a quagmire. And finally, the city manager at that time just said, why don't you just get an appraisal and pay us full price and we'll sell it to you. Well, we did that, but we also were happy to oblige there is a first right of refusal to the city of Wichita if we would ever want to sell the building. But 2006 seemed like a good idea. Anybody recall what happened in 07, 08? Oh my gosh. Timing's everything. We probably would have chickened out if it was 07, 08. We were hurting just like Wichita was hurting, just like the country was hurting. But fortunately, we forged ahead. And remember that picture on opening day 1915? This is the same view. This is that 3/4 sphere planetarium shell. You can notice there were a couple columns here that aren't here. The balustrade's gone, the floor's gone on 2 levels. It was quite a project to transform that part, but we were up for it. This is a view of one of the first floor wings, and you know, as I mentioned, the library went dark in the year 2000. So for 5 years, what do you do with an old building with no heat? The city decided to store all of the Christmas decorations for the streetlights, which was fine. And then we saw this. There's no window there, but it was built for a window. And it was actually covered with plywood before this picture was taken. And so we kind of peeled that off. And in it, inserted in the window, was this frieze, or I call it a tribute tablet. And it reads, "This tablet is erected in affectionate memory to one who sought to spread the gospel of the beautiful in our community, and to one whose disinterested civic service has enabled others to serve and to achieve happiness, to Louise Caldwell Murdoch." And then, "Light your fire, never fear, life was made for love and cheer." Well, yes, it was Louise Caldwell Murdoch, and yes, she was the interior designer of the library building. She was self-taught interior decorator. She sought training in that field and had taken on commercial commissions, and one that she really sought and went after was the Carnegie Library. Remarkable is the word I used to describe her. She was, as a woman who had grown up in Wichita, she was very smart. She was involved in the Chautauqua movement. She founded the 20th Century Club. And her husband had died in 1908, I believe it was, and she really wanted to become skilled at interior design. And so she put herself on a train, went to New York, and met a Dr. Parsons. And he was setting up a design. He was involved in interior design, the department at this college, which today bears his name, the Parsons School of Design. And she came back to Wichita, and she got the library commission. Unfortunately, she was dying of cancer, and she felt like she wouldn't live to see the opening, and she did die a few weeks before the library building opened in the spring of 1915. And she called a couple of workers over that were working inside the library and said, "I want you to witness my signature on this." And They didn't know what they were signing, but she had penned out her own last will and testament and left her estate to the citizens of Wichita to build a purely American art collection. But she was smart enough to know there needs to be a building to house this collection, and there is none. And so she put in her will that if the city commissioners did not want to build a facility suitable for housing her collection, then she would leave her $400,000 estate to Baker University. And she also worried about who was going to select the art. Well, she appointed her 29-year-old assistant, Elizabeth Novice, as trustee of her estate. And in so doing, that's how we have the Roland P. Murdoch collection of art, American art, at the Wichita Art Museum. There were many national accolades, the Philadelphia Record, the Kansas City Star, Scribner's Magazine, this one from the Ladies' Home Journal, March 1916, touting what Mrs. Murdoch had created, a very unique Carnegie Library building amongst the sea of Carnegie Library buildings. That tribute tablet, we felt like, in fact, I probably shouldn't tell this story in this building, but the Wichita Art Museum had an opportunity to remove that tablet way before we thought of the library. And the story I was told was the city said, yeah, you can have it, but you need to pay a couple $1,000s so that we can have the money to replace the window. And they didn't want to do that. So I'm very grateful that that didn't happen, because we felt like it was the artifact of the library building. And we, because that building is on the register for Wichita, Kansas, and the Federal Register, we had to go to the National Archives, not only for the building plans of what we were doing, but specifically to get permission to remove that tribute tablet and place it center stage in the rotunda on the first floor. And fortunately, the contractor actually made the move when I was out of town. So I think that it looks like it's bronze, but it's made out of plaster. And fortunately, it was not very strongly adhered to the backing as to where it was installed, and they built a special vehicle of sorts to remove it and roll it over to the rotunda. Here's just a look at some of the work that went on. You can see no floor on the second floor or balustrade and the like. This is a very interesting picture to me because it's the same angle as what you see here. Because this was a science center, somebody decided it would be cool to put a biplane on the, paint a mural on it. But notice where these people are. They're out here. Well, how does the library, how do they, Wichita, maintain, this is the central library for 52 years. They actually put in a floor. They filled in the rotunda and cut the balustrade and made a reading room out of air. And it was then removed later on when the Wichita Omnisphere was created. Reproduction lighting, this is an old picture on the right, and all the lamps in the library in 2006 were fluorescent tubes, 8-foot bare fluorescent tubes in some locations. And so we were able to find a group out in Oregon, and by group, I think it was 3 guys in a big oversized garage, and they specialized in taking a in building a chandelier out of metal using a kind of a reverse engineering, taking a picture, making some assumptions about the scale of it. And in the attic, we actually found one of these lenses, and it had about 7 pounds of roofing tar spilled on it. And we cleaned it up, crated it up, shipped it off to these guys, so they had that also to figure the scale for the 6 chandeliers. A lot of plaster work. This is the same room. That was it in the 1920s, I believe. You can't really see it, but that's actually a John Noble painting that Mrs. Murdoch was able to convince Mr. Noble to paint and give to, not give, but to sell to Wichita. It's in the collection of the Mark Arts, by the way. I've seen it. Bookcases to radiators. At Science Center, took these original quarter-sawn oak bookcases and built little science stations into them. You can see the conduit and the like. We cleaned those up. You can see an original radiator and how those were cleaned up. They're not functional, but we had a plumber hook them up as if they were, because it's part of that historic fabric of the building. And there you see my wife with a print, and she's holding it in a bookcase. And part of the reason for that is I got to thinking, gee, there's 22 quarter-sawn oak bookcases on the first floor, and I don't want our employees putting gym bags and training manuals on those shelves. Maybe we could hang art there, and that commenced quite a purchasing plan for regionalists' prints and paintings, either of the time period or of our part of the country. Stenciling. When we removed one of those fluorescent tubes from the beam ceiling, I noticed there was a little bit of red around the bolt hole, and I thought, what is that? And our artisan melted away the paint and found that there was a stencil pattern there. And then we saw this picture of the ceiling and realized that, yes, Mrs. Murdoch had figured out an original pattern, and this artisan, Robert Elliott, they've figured out the stencil, put it on a CAD system using 3 different colors, and re-stenciled both ceilings in the second floor. I think Mrs. Murdoch would be proud. Mosaic tile. We only found one. We finally found a company in Arkansas that could make the tiles the right color and the right thickness. We found lots of the same color, but not the thickness to do restoration there. Marble steps had blue glue-down carpeting on them for years. And amazing, I thought we were going to have to break them all out and replace them, but they were able to restore the marble in the field. And they look great today. Walkway. We had to do quite a bit of discussing with the federal government about allowing this walkway. And in fact, it's actually the Department of the Interior that rules on any significant changes that you would make to the structure of a property that's on the Federal Register. And they did finally agree. We had to submit a number of items, but didn't hold us up too bad. And the day that was brought in, it was brought in on a big crane, just the metal structure of it, and the total weight is borne by 3 pedestals. One of the things, if you know anything about historic preservation, They don't want to see anything structurally attached to the exterior of the building. So other than a rubber seal at that end to keep things, to keep the snow out, the weight of the walkway, it's a 60-foot long walkway, is borne by the pedestals, and it was a big deal to us to be able to be able to move mail carts and things to and from the library and our headquarters building. How am I doing on time? Thought there was a clock here.
You're doing great.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll speed it up a little bit. Here you see various views of the Rotunda. Restoration was complete in 2009. That's got our architect and our interior decorator and a facilities manager and my brother and I. Art of the Carnegie. It's a Beaux Arts building. It is art in and of itself. I didn't get much out of my junior high Latin class, but I remember there's 3 different kinds of Roman columns: Corinthian, Ionic, and Doric. And we have all 3 in the Carnegie Library building. This tribute tablet is kind of interesting. Down at the bottom it says Zim 1918. And I found out that in the memory of Mrs. Murdoch, her friends took up a collection and approached Bruno Zim, an American artist who, living in New York, he designed the panels at the time the library opened for the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, these huge panels. And I was pretty impressed that that's the origin of the tribute tablet. The murals in the library building, the Spirit of Kansas, they were a triptych of murals that represented pre-settlement, settlement, and the future of Kansas. And they were kind of in static, posed positions. I'd also point out this is from that Ladies' New Home Journal article, and it's showing this large Rotunda chandelier, which was great because we didn't know what the chandelier looked like, and this picture opened our eyes on that. There you can see what we ended up having commissioned. Those murals that went around the doors to the corners on 3 sides, I wanted to do something that was in the spirit of what Mrs. Murdoch had figured out. And so I approached a gallery owner who introduced me to an artist from St. Louis who was doing large-scale murals. And I had him come to Wichita. I gave him a couple of possible ideas. One was that Treaty of the Little Arkansas. And in it, he actually portrays 24 different characters that were at this treaty, 6 miles north of us. Kit Carson was there. William Bent from Bent's Fort was there. They were both peace commissioners. Jesse Chisholm is drawn in the center, offering a peace pipe. He was an interpreter for the Kiowa. And this St. Louis artist didn't really know anything about Wichita history, so I sent him next door to the Historical Museum. And he came out about 45 minutes later, and he had 8 or 9 books, history books, under his arm. And as a surprise, when the mural was done, he had this treaty legend that has lines drawn to each of the characters that are in the painting. I said, "How do you get the perspective right?" He goes, "Okay, I'll give you a little secret." And he sent me this, and it's he's placed himself in about 20 different poses along with his granddaughter, because there are 2 women that attended the treaty. placed this using desktop publishing, and that's how he got the perspectives perfect. He also did a painting for us, The Four Horsemen of Wichita. Talks about how James R. Meade and 3 of his buddies saved Wichita from a fate worse than death, to be knocked off the Chisholm Trail by a competing prairie town, and it hangs on the opposite side. The stained glass windows in the Rotunda have been kind of a story of interest to us. The original windows, which were designed by Elizabeth Novice, were given away by our mayor and city commissioners to the Kansas Chapel at the DAR in Washington, D.C., and there you see the windows from the Rotunda. And they also went, the parts that they didn't use went to different places. The thought was that Elizabeth Novice, she took credit for designing the windows, and you know, there was also some curiosity about were they made by Tiffany. I don't think so, but, and that's Elizabeth Novice. I did find just about a month ago, I was shown a picture of what Mrs. Murdoch's home looked like, and you can see there are sunflowers in that dining room panel door, pocket door. So I don't know, maybe Louise influenced the design. And to my total amazement, Mark Arts, which had in their custody 2 of the remaining sunflower windows, had decided in their move that they were going to sell them. They were not part of their collection. They were, I'm not sure. They've got light boxes around them. They've got contact paper on them. They might have been used in a performance in the theater. But I had some people say, hey, somebody needs to call Clark. Maybe he'd be interested in buying these. And I certainly did. I think it was maybe 2 hours after we heard about it that I was now the new owner of the Rotunda windows. And we'll be figuring out, after we have a little bit of work done on them, good cleaning, that we'll probably put them in light boxes. And lastly, the lion that used to be out front, we moved the lion to the backyard of the library. He's a lot happier there. Celebrations, I want to go through this real quickly, and I apologize for running long on my time. We were very happy with the community's response to our stewardship of the building, and we really wanted to play it up for the Centennial. We put up a website. If you Google Wichita Carnegie, it'll take you right to the website. There's a lot of photos and history. We celebrated the Centennial with free concerts in September of 2015, and that's Robin Macy and the Cherokee Maidens. We've repeated this concert. We're in partnership with High Touch Technology, and every September we're going to be doing that again this September on Wednesdays. We hold a free concert in the park over lunch, and the food trucks are there. All you got to do is buy some food and enjoy some music. We had Andrew Carnegie come visit us. Bob Garrett, who's a local interpreter. Bob's about a foot taller than Andrew Carnegie was, but anyway, he really looked the part. There's a plaque, if you go back to the back side of the library, that's got a story about Mrs. Murdoch and about Andrew Carnegie. And we celebrated with a book giveaway. We gave 1,000 copies of The Wizard of Oz to any kid that walked up to us at the Centennial open house. And you can see Bonnie Bing as Glenna the Good Witch of the South. And we also bought art. this by Gary Lee Price of Utah. I was really taken by this piece because it's called Journeys of the Imagination. For a kid that grew up in the air capital city, air capital of the world, I liked the theme, as well as at the bottom, the base of it is a little boy. It's that little boy, and he's reading a book, and he's dreaming about flight. We're done. Questions? I know one question that might be on your mind. On the brochure, if you got that three-fold at lunch, there on the back is this information. I'm usually giving tours in the library, not outside the library like I am today. So we've arranged for some time. If you would like to go on a tour, feel free to follow that information that's on the back. Yes?
On exterior-wise, did you have anything that you had to address on the outside of that? Are things in pretty good shape?
The outside of the building, well, it was in as good a shape as it would be for a 97-year-old building then. There was a bit of tuck pointing to do. The city had done a pretty good job of keeping that up. We did, however, go down deep and waterproof the basement walls just to avoid problems in the future. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what happened to the 3 triptych panels that you replaced with the one?
The big murals, yes, you can see them. And I hate to be plugging for a competitor, but yes, Keith, Southwest National Bank at Topeka and Douglas. It's really a wonderful story because in 1975, the city was going to, I'm just quoting the Wichita Eagle, was going to get rid of the murals because they were not suitable. They were in kind of bad shape, but they were painted on canvas. But they were thinking that they were just going to get rid of them because of, the Omnisphere Bicentennial project needed to look differently. And a banker, Southwest National Bank, said, I will pay to have those murals restored. They hauled them over to the basement of Century 2 where there was a lot of room, did the restoration, and if you go in the bank lobby, they're very proud to show you those Arthur Covey murals. Time for one more, I think.
I'm just curious as to the original design of the building. I think I know that a number of the Carnegie libraries followed just a kind of a general same building plan. Do you know, was this one kind of one of those style that they normally did, or was there something different about this one?
It really followed along the lines of the central rotunda, symmetrical wings, the steps leading up to knowledge from that standpoint. Carnegie was pretty sharp because the amount of his gift was pretty much based on the size of the community. Emporia may have gotten 30,000, where Wichita got 75,000. Kansas City received 100,000 for their library. So in that respect, they were different in that vein. But the Beaux Arts style, I've seen that on other buildings, but there's a lot that aren't. They're just a variety of styles. But that was the magic in wanting the cities to embrace it as their own, and he was just the funder. But he didn't want to get too crazy.